Okay, so here at New Forest Sewing Studio, our monthly make this month was the Doe and Doe Bleuet dress. So it's a princess seam dress with button down at the front. I made view B with the collar and with the bow at the back. Made it up in our Riviera viscose linen fabric. I'll put some photos at the end of the sew along, so I hope this helps someone with their sewing. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to make version B with the bow. You'll have been already able to see that because you'll have seen the dress that I'm wearing. So the first step is to make the bow here in the instructions. So we're going to get our back bow piece 6, okay, and then we're going to just pin that right sides together. It's difficult to tell with this fabric, but that is right sides together. So I'm going to pin that and stitch 5/8 of an inch along that side and 5/8 of an inch along that side, and then I'll show you how I grade the seams, and then we're going to turn it out and top stitch it. And then this one we want to just fold it, which is piece 5 for your piece 5 for your bow. They call it bow wrap, which is a centerpiece of the bow. So that it wants you to turn it that way, so long ways, stitch 1.5 centimetres, so 5/8 of an inch, sorry, it's all in inches, 5/8 of an inch down that side there, and then we'll also turn that in the right way and top stitch it. So I'll do those and then I'll show you what I've done. Okay, so I've stitched down both sides of there. I'm just grading this seam, so I'll show you how to do that. So I've just stitched down both sides of there and graded that seam. So all I'm going to do is just trim about half off one of the seam allowances. I'm trying to show you and I can't see what I'm doing. Okay, so I've got half of that off there, and then we can just turn that in the right way. That one's quite easy to turn through. Right, so that's turned in the right way, so I'm going to give that a press in a minute, and then once I've pressed it, I'm going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch, just quite close to the edge along each of those sides. I'm not going to use a top stitching thread because I don't particularly want it to stand out as such, but I'm going to lengthen my stitch, which I just practiced on just see what stitch length you want, just try on a scrap bit of fabric. So I'm just going to lengthen my stitch to about 3.5, just to do a slightly longer stitch along there, but I don't want a different colour in it to stand out, particularly on this fabric. And then this one, we've stitched together your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance there, and then I prefer to then press it open like that, so that it sits, you know, so you haven't got a ridge either side, it's even. And then the easiest way to do this is with a pin. So we're going to just carefully put a pin in the top there. Just put a pin in the top and then threadle that through. To get it started. It's okay. She says, yeah, there we go. Okay, once you get it started, you can quite easily just tuck that through. Be careful with your fabric. There we go, once you get hold of it. And then I'm going to press it so that that seam goes down the centre of the back of the piece. Okay, so I'm going to press it like that, so I've got the seam down the back, the centre, so that side, and then it's nice and even. You haven't got, because you've got that seam allowance split sort of in the middle. And I'm going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch down each side of those. Okay, and then we're going to join that bit together to make the loop. Okay, so I'm going to press those, top stitch those, and I'll show you how we do the loop. Okay, so that's that piece top stitched down each of those edges there, and that's that piece turned out and top stitched along there. Now it says to put it right sides together and stitch your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to make your loop, and then neaten the edges, but I prefer to neaten them first, as I will definitely want to press them open, not to one side, so that it's less bulky. So I've neatened those already, so we're just going to stitch a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance down that back there, and then I'll show you, we'll put the bow together and then put it on the back of the dress. Okay, so that's that stitched there. I have pressed that open a little bit as well, so then we're gonna fiddle about with that in the right way. Like so. We'll just, that seam's pressed open at the back there. Okay, and then we're going to thread this to make the bow, so that needs to go in the end there. So it's going to be a bit of fiddling about to get that through there. That's it. Right. Move that so that's in the middle. Turn it around so it's definitely in the centre. There we go, so that's the bow done. Probably what I'm going to do, it doesn't say to stitch it to the back anywhere, but I might just do a couple of little hand stitches just to keep that in place so it doesn't move about or roll around for the seam to the front. So yeah, I'm just going to see where the middle of that is. So measure from there to there, so that's 8.5 that side, 9 that side, so just that way a smidge on 8 3/4, 8 3/4, yeah, so that's about in the halfway there. Both sides looking the same. Oops. Yeah, so that looks about the same both sides. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is just turn that over carefully, and probably what I'm going to do is just stitch it just to there. So just get a little bit of that edge. Just catch it with that very bit there, I think. Just do the same thing on the other side here. Doesn't say to do this in the instructions, so you don't have to, but I just don't want the bow bit to be moving about at the back. So you just try and just anchor it somewhere really. Doesn't have to be overly strong or anything. Just try that. Oopsie daisy. Oh, Lord. The right knot. Oh, right. sort of fixed to there. That's not going to keep moving along. Okay, so let's just get rid of that needle. Okay, so then we want our back piece of the dress. Which is this one right at the bottom would be. So next we want piece 3, which is our centre back. Okay, piece 3, which is our centre back. Then we're going to attach that to there to make the centre of the back. So I think it lines up with that notch. I would imagine lines up with that notch there. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now mine will be a slightly different shape because I graded my to grade the waist of my dress. So I made the bow to the full size of the dress. So, but if you haven't needed to grade or anything, it should sit exactly to the curves of the dress, but I did change mine slightly. There we go, so line up both of those that side, and then I'm just going to make sure that all sits nice and flat, like so. That should be the other way up actually, I think that might be the other way up. Let's just turn that round because that end is longer than that end to make it more sense. Just because I've graded mine, so it makes it slightly different. That's better. That's better. Right. So that's not much different actually. There we go. So I'm just going to make sure that's sat nice and flat. Then we're just going to baste that in place down both those sides. Okay, and then that's the bow positioned in the back of the dress, and then we're going to attach the side pieces to the back. Okay, so I'm going to baste that in place first. Okay, so that's the bow attached to the back of the dress. Okay, so now we're going to get the side back, which is piece 4. Okay, the side backs. Over there. And the inside is the right side on mine, so then we want to attach these side backs to the back. So the top bit fits here, just up to where your arm side is there. There's my pins. There. That notch also joins at the waistline notch where you attached and lined up your bow. Okay, that side there. Right down the length of his skirt, so then I would normally join at the bottom first. I did lengthen mine, my dress. I lengthened it 10 centimetres, I think. Otherwise it came at just at my knee, and I'm not particularly tall, I'm only 5'2", so yeah, I just wanted it a bit longer, so I lengthened it by 10 centimetres, I think. So that along there, right. And then this bit here is your bust shaping. Sorry, your back shaping. Similar shape on the Princess Seaman bust. That's what's making me think of that. So roughly find the centre. Put that in there first. then this one, pin in the middle first, check you've got it all sort of lining up, pin in the middle there, and then pin in the middle. Pin the centre of those two there. So I'm going to go and stitch that seam, and I'm going to do exactly the same with the other side. Overlock the edges, and then we're going to, it does say to top stitch them along, so I think I will. Okay, so I'll show you that next. Okay, so that's the back of the dress completed, okay, with the bow in place. You can see that okay. So I'm going to put that to one side for a minute, and then we're going to do the front pieces. So the centre front pieces, both centre fronts, side, which is centre front is piece 1. Okay, so you're going to get both of those, and then you're going to interface on the wrong side down the front pieces. So you're going to cut, I think it's strips of interfacing that are 3/4 of an inch wide, and then you apply them 1.5 inches from the centre front. So you're guided by your notches that are at the top here that you'll have marked. You should have marked from the top there. Okay, so basically you're applying your interfacing down this piece here where the buttons are going to go, or the buttons in your buttonhole are going to go. So then when you've done that, we're then going to attach the side fronts, which is piece 2. Okay, there. And we're going to attach those to the centre front pieces along the princess seam. So you just want right sides together. So let's turn that one over. And the right side was the inside of my fabric, so I want that one there. That one we'll do in a minute. So you'll have a notch that will join up somewhere along here. There we are, there. You'll have a notch that will join up there. And then join it up, that bit joins to the top there. We'll do the bust bit in a minute, so we'll join the rest of this first. Join that at the bottom. Set nice and flat. Put a couple of pins in along there to line that all up. There we go, so just pin that on there. Got a notch. Yeah, you've got a notch there as well. Okay, and just line that up there. So I'm going to pin more in the middle there. So then this is the bit that looks a bit more complicated, is to the princess seam shaping. So you'll have a notch at the point of your princess seam, and then you'll have a notch in your centre front piece. So you're going to align those two together there. I'll show you on the pattern piece. So that's, you will have a notch right there at your bust point, and that will line up with the notch there on your centre front pieces. So pin where the notch is first of all, okay, so then you've got that. So then all you do is you just get those edges, so find the centre first, match that. And it's worth putting a few pins in place whenever it's on a curve or like this unusual sort of curve, and you'll make, you know, adjusting that ease, fitting that ease. It's worth putting a few pins in. And then the same thing with this one, so just get it nice and even, find the centre, mark the centre first, and fold it like the centre of that. And find the centre there. And the centre there. Okay, so you might find you want quite a few pins around that bust piece just to get it to sit evenly and make sure you've got that ease put in evenly. A couple more in there. Okay, so then we're going to stitch down that seam, 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and you're going to neaten the edges like we've done before, either with a zigzag stitch or I use an overlocker, and then you need to press it towards the seam allowance towards the centre front. Yeah. So we're going to press it, once we've neatened that, we'll press it towards the centre front and then top stitch, and then that will be our seam. So I'm going to do that on both of those, and then we're going to join the dress together at the side seams and the shoulder seams next. Okay, so I'll do that first. Do this first. So we've sewn those and top stitched that princess seam down the front. Okay. So now we're going to join the fronts to the back at the shoulder and the side seam. So you just want to line, so right sides together, line your shoulders up at the top, right sides and right sides. So line the shoulders up along here. Just pin those in place. Just do one side to show you. On there, and you're just going to stitch those at your 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and then we're going to do exactly the same thing down this side. So you best to join them at the top. And then there's a notch partway down here, which is there, so join those. So it's best to join it up with your fabric at the ends and at your notches, and then you can make sure you've got it nice and flat in between. I'm doing it at the bottom here, so that all lines up. Notches in the middle here, can't remember. Another one there, another notch there, so join that one up. Okay, I think that's it. So then we'll just put a couple of pins in between here just to keep those edges together. Okay, so we're going to stitch, pin the other side seam as well. So I'm going to stitch the side seams and the shoulder seams all at 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Then I'm going to overlock, or you can zigzag stitch, whatever you're going to do to neaten your seam. And then it's just the side seams that get top stitched. Yeah, top stitch. Press the seam allowances are pressed towards the back of the dress, and then the side seams are top stitched, so not the shoulder seams. Yeah, just top stitching the side seams, not the shoulder seams. Okay, so I'm going to do that on both sides, and then it's sorting out the hem facing. Okay. dress. It's a bit difficult to show you like this, but that's the side seam there. Okay, so I've stitched that, overlocked it, pressed it towards the back, and then top stitched it down the side. And same thing with this, with the shoulder seams. I did decide to top stitch along there, although it doesn't ask you to, but I decided I would. I just think it'll give some strength to the, it's quite a loose, fairly loose weave on this fabric, so I just wanted to give that a bit more strength there. So I have done that, and all the other seams are top stitched, so I thought it matched better. So that's that. So we're going to put that to one side just for a moment. Like that there. So the next thing we need to do is the hem facing. So so we want to get the piece 11, which is your back facing, piece 11 there. Okay, and then pieces 10. So you'll have one cut on the fold, piece 11 for your back facing, and 2 piece 10s cut. So you're just going to fold that out. So my right side is on the inside. So there. So that one goes there, and then that one goes there. And then we're just going to stitch these seams. So I think it's same seam allowance. So we're just going to stitch those both at 1.5 centimetres each seam allowance at the side seams there. Okay, so going to stitch those, and I'm not going to neaten those because they're going to be enclosed in the hem when you turn the facing up. So I'm just going to stitch those, press them open, and then it wants you just to neaten this top edge. So it's the inner curve edge that you're going to neaten, because that's the bit that's going to be hemmed up. So that we're going to do next. So I'm going to stitch those, press them open so that the seams are pressed open before we I'll overlock that top edge, and then we're going to fix it to the hem. Okay, so that's the seams sewn, both sides there. Okay, both there, and then overlocked that curved edge, so it's the upper sort of inner curve bit like that along there. And now we're going to attach that to the skirt hem. So we want to get our dress here, and then we want to attach it right sides together. So I would join the side seams with the seams on the facing first. 2 pins there. Once you've got those joined in, then you can just position there. You might be able to hear our chickens and ducks because I've got the windows open today, so you might be able to hear them coughing in the background. I think it's the same seam allowance. So I'm going to stitch all that round with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Then we're going to press the facing down onto the seam allowance, and then we're going to understitch. Understitched there, which is just to, not to the front, just to the seam allowance and the facing. Okay, and then press that up, and then it asks you to blind hand stitch, but I've just stitched around on my machine. I feel if you've got top stitching along there, then it's a nice deep hem, so that's quite, I like that. And I've just stitched it round on the machine. So then it wants you to fold your button placket over, so you're just going to fold it right down both sides. You're just going to fold it once where the notches mark at the end, and then fold it again so that it covers that interfacing strip you put on there earlier. So I tend to put mine, it does explain to do it sort of now, but I tend to do it earlier on when I you know, after I've cut out. I tend to do all my interfacing at the same time then. So mine's already done. So what I'm going to do next is just top stitch right down that front band. Yeah, just top stitch down that edge on both sides, and then we'll do the sleeve arm side. I probably will do the cap sleeve, because then I can show you how to put that in, how that works. Okay. Okay, so that's the front button bands all stitched down. Okay, down there on both sides. So next we're going to do the sleeves. I will do the cap sleeve, because then I can show you how it's done for view B. So you're going to get your piece 7 pattern piece here, okay, and you're going to fold it wrong sides together. Okay, so I've got wrong sides together and pin that around the edge, and then you're going to just base stitch that around that curved edge there, like I've done on that one, and then we're going to set it into the sleeve. So we want that wrong side out, and then you've got notches on here, so you've got a double notch which will be at the back. I have to find it now. Yeah, that's my double notch, so that's at the back, so that's this side. Okay, and my double notch is somewhere there, but a bit frayed, so disappearing. So you're going to join those double notches there up. Put that down to there. And then this just gets basted in place at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, because then we're going to put the binding right the way around, so that will stitch that in. So there's a notch somewhere on the front here, if I can find it now. There it is. So that notch will join up with that notch there. And then you're just going to line this up around the top. So obviously if you're doing the sleeveless option, you wouldn't need to do this, but you just go straight to the binding. But I'll show you how to put in the cap sleeve. So that's pinned in place like that. Okay, so there's nothing to the lower sleeve here, because that will be bound, but the cap sleeve bit is just around at the top there. So I'm going to stitch that in place, baste it in place, 1/4 inch seam allowance, do exactly the same for the other one, and then we'll bind the arm side, the armhole. Okay. Okay, so that's the sleeve cap sewn in around there. Okay, so that's all sewn in. Alright, sits like that. So now we want to turn that way around because we want to attach our bias binding. So where's it gone? That's not my end. So you want your bias binding, you just want it folded in half. So this is just some Liberty bias binding. I just unfolded the other edges and then just folded it over into half. And then this end I've just folded over a little bit at the end and then press that over again, just so that will make a neat finish to your binding. So we're just going to pin that around. Like so. So that one. Just thinking I'm going to go that way, aren't I? It's just a bit more. So you're pinning it to the right side of the dress at the armhole. So if you've done the cap sleeve, you're going to be going over the top here. So if you've done the cap sleeve, that's the cap sleeve stitched in there, you're just going to be putting the binding over the top around there. So you're enclosing that binding seam. So your cap sleeve is basically sandwiched between your binding and your dress. Okay, like that. And you're just going to sort of hold it round. That's it, like that. Now I'm just going to keep pinning all the way around till I come to this end piece here, and then you'll just overlap slightly that end piece on top of the other one you turned under. Then when you turn it over the other way, you'll have a finished, folded in finished edge. Okay, so I'm going to do that on both sleeves, pin those around there. Okay, stitch those in place. I think it's a 1/4 inch, oh no, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then trim it down to 1/4 inch. Okay, so we're going to trim it, stitch it at 3/8 of an inch centimetre seam allowance, and then we'll trim the seam down to 1/4 inch, and then we're going to fold that all over to the inside, so it'll make a nice finished edge. Okay, so we'll do that. How much of that you saw? So we're just pinning it around there. I'm going to go right the way around to that edge until that is overlapped on that edge there. Okay, so then I'll stitch that side. And also, actually, it doesn't say about under stitching it, but I probably will, because it helps it to keep it folded over, so I'll show you that. Okay, so we've stitched that round, okay, at a centimetre seam allowance. So then you're just going to trim that down around like that, about 1/4 inch. It's a bit fiddly when you go around there. Careful of the rest of your fabric, obviously. It's got quite a few layers around the sleeve cap a bit. I'm going to cover that. Yeah, right. Okay, around that. and then I'm going to fold that, and I'm just going to understitch my bias binding to my seam allowance, okay, around there, okay, which I'll show you I've done on this one. So I've just stitched that bias binding to the seam allowance, okay, and that way when you fold it over like that, it naturally folds that bias binding right underneath, so you don't see any of that bias binding on the outside. And then you're just going to stitch around, fold that bias binding over, and then stitch around there to secure that in place. Okay, so I'm going to finish those, and then I think we're on to the collar. Yeah, onto the collar next. Okay. Okay, so that's the oh, sorry, my cat's just come in. That's the get rid of that thread. Right, that is the cap sleeve, okay, with the dress there, and that's the bound, so it's bound all the way around, so it's a nice neat finish, okay, on the inside. So next we're going to do the collar, so we're going to put that to one side. My naughty cat's come to join me, so hopefully she won't interfere. She's a bit of a one for getting involved. Right, so next we want piece 9, the collar, and it does, I think, say to, yeah, it just says cut 2 on the fold and apply interfacing, but I just decided to interface one side of mine. Make sure I've got that right sides together. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I just decided to interface one side of mine. I think you just need to see, you know, interface one and then see how you feel with it together. But I thought them both interfaced would be a bit too, make it a bit too stiff. So although it's a lightweight interfacing, but I still didn't want to do 2. Often they'll ask you just to do 1 on a collar. So yeah, I didn't want it to. I'll just keep it nice and soft. Oh, my cat's gone out on the window ledge now. Such a mischief. Come say hello, Tish. No? Go downstairs. So we're going to stitch right round these. So we're going to stitch around this outer edge. So around to there, up there, pivot with a needle down, round to there, pivot, needle down, round to there. Doesn't say the seam allowance is any different. Nope, I assume it's 5/8, the same as the rest of the main of the pattern, unless it says different. So yeah, so 5/8 of an inch seam allowance around there, and then we're going to clip the corners. I'll probably grade that. I'll show you that. Turn it out, press it, and then top stitch around. So I'll stitch it, and then I'll show you how I'll grade the seams. Okay, so that's the collar stitched. Okay, that's the interface and the non-interface side. So I'm going to trim down my seam allowance on one of the seams. Okay, just like that, just so that then it doesn't create such a ridge with the both of them put together. Excuse my cat, she's shouting. Hang on, I'll have to go and see what she wants. Sorry about that, she's gone out now. Oh, a cat's life, eh? She's lovely though, she's just a bit crazy. There you go. So I've just graded that to sort of that one about half the seam. Oh, just a bit more of that one. Less on that one for some reason. Right. So then the other thing we need to do is to trim down these corners. So you're just going to trim it pretty close to the edge of that stitching. So close but not right up to the edge of that stitching there. Okay. So just move all that out of the way. Okay, and then we're going to turn that out the right way, give that a press, turn that all out the right way, give it a press and poke out those corners, give it a press, and then top stitch all the way around, about an 1/8 inch all the way around that edge of the collar, and then we're going to sandwich it between the collar stand they want us to next. Okay. Okay, so that's the collar stand turned out and top stitched around that edge. And I also like to, so when you're doing your collar, try and so excuse my voice, try and make sure that your seam allowance is just slightly turned under, or at least to the edge there when you top stitch around. And then the lower edge here, it doesn't ask you to, but I've just basted those layers together just because it's easier then to insert it into the collar stand. I just basted it together at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so then it's going to want you to get your 2 collar stand bits, and basically we're going to stitch our collar in between those two. So it's easier to pin one first. So you've got notches on your collar stand here that join up with the notches on your, just about to see one there, one there. Where's the other one? Yeah, there's one there. Can't see very well. And that one there. Okay, I'll mark that one in a bit better so you can see it. Okay, so we're going to line that one up with there. So this is the side with the curved edge, curved ends as it were. So I'll show you when I've got it all together. And that one there. So I'm just going to put a few in place first just to get that lined up. And if you're not sure, you could base this side in first and then attach your and then attach the other side if you weren't sure about catching it all in one go. Just make sure you've got those the same both sides where that finishes. The same. So then we want to put the other one this side. So again, right sides together. And we're just going to line that up with that one. And that there. Pin those edges around the end. And that corner. That notch there, so join the two together there. And the same with that notch there. And again, find the centre there. Just put a couple more in between there now. And put all the layers together. So you're just making sure you've got all those layers in there, that your collar stand is sandwiched between the two, and all your sort of raw edges match up at the top. So again, so that one's dropped down there a bit. There we go. Put that one there. just making sure you've got all 3 raw edges of your seam allowance all together at the top there, so it equals, you know, so you don't get an unequal collar each side. Try and get it even if you can. Okay, so that's all pinned in place like that. Now it wants you to stitch around here, so 5/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around, but not right to this edge here, so 5/8 of an inch up from there. So I'm just going to grab measure. There it is. So I want 5/8. So I'm 5/8 measured up there. So I'll just get a chalk pen or something just to mark that in. Hopefully it'll mark. Yeah, just about. Doesn't always want to mark on interfacing. There we go. Better that side. Okay. So just marking up where I want to stop there. I don't want to stitch right to the edge down to here. Okay, because that in a minute will need to be folded up to join onto our collar, as we stitched and joined onto the collar. All right. So I'll go and stitch that, and then we'll. Just grade the seam allowance again, sort of much as I did before. Turn it all in the right way, and then we're going to attach it to the collar, the neck of the dress. Okay, so that's our collar stand attached. Okay, that's both sides. So now we want to attach the under collar stand to, this is where I have to think about this, to the wrong side of the dress. Do it. So you're gonna where you've got some tailor's tacks there, which were these bits marked on your pattern here for whichever size you are, marked on your collar stand piece. They will match up with the right one. They will match up with your shoulder seam. Right place. There we go. So you're pinning this, so you're pinning your under collar to the wrong side of your dress. That one's going to line up. Oh, if I get onto the end, that one's going to line up with there. Few pins in just to show you, and I'll pin the rest of it in a minute. So someone said on one of my videos that there was too much pinning, so there you go. Right, you can't win sometimes. You can't get it right for everybody. Right, so that's that one. Find the centre of the back first, back of the neck first, there. Overcast today, but it's still hot here in the UK. Unusual temperatures for us lately. Right, so that edge needs to, where you've got the point of that, needs to join exactly on that edge of your button band there if you can. Okay, and then get that evened in. Those edges together. Okay, so I'll put a few more pins in just to keep all that lined up in place, and then we're going to stitch 1.5 centimetres or 5/8 of an inch around that. So we're just stitching our under collar to the inside of our dress. Yeah, to the inside, so it's the wrong side of your dress. Okay, so I'm going to go and stitch that, and then I'll show you how we're going to clip and trim that a bit, and then press this bit over to cover the seam allowance there. Okay, so I've trimmed down I've sewn that along there. Just so I can show you. Stitch that along there, okay, and then I've trimmed down my seam allowance. I just trimmed the collar stand piece, okay, and then press the seam allowance. You just need to press the seam allowance up towards the collar, so up that way, like so, okay, up that way, and then you just want to fold this down, turn that edge under, so your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and then pin that in place along there, okay, so that will be where, that's where my I'll take those out, they're going to get stuck inside actually. So 1.5, like that. Get those tailor's tacks out of that one. 1.5, that meets the side seam. There we go, like that, and then pin it. Just pin it around, lining up your folded edge with the seam allowance, okay, and then it's worth giving it a press before you stitch it, and then we're going to stitch around the lower edge, this edge that we've pinned in place, and right around the collar stand. So I would start in the middle rather than starting up here. I would start in the middle here, stitch around, and then end up in the middle, because that's the bit that's less likely. Definitely don't start on a end here, because that's the bit that if you haven't got it buttoned up to the top and folded over, that will be visible. So start in the middle there, where it's not going to be seen on the inside of actually that is the outside, but on the back of the neck there, because the collar will be folded over there, so it'll be less visible there. We can start that one maybe. Yeah, so either of those, yeah, I'll show you when I've done that, and then it's the buttonholes and buttons. Okay, so I've sewn the collar, oops, tacking through it everywhere. So I've sewn the collar in place, that's the outside, that's the inside. So I'll put a label, just put a label in the back as well. So that's, get it sorted out. So that's the collar attached there, okay. So what I'm going to do now is the buttonholes. So I didn't put tailor's tacks in mine because there's a lot. So I just tend to, when I've completed it, get my pattern piece. So you want your centre front piece, okay, and then I mark my seam allowance, which is 1.5 down from the top. That will line up with your collar there. And then I folded the pattern, so I folded the pattern where my buttonholes are, okay, so then I've folded that over, and then I'm going to line my 1.5 centimetre mark up with the, roughly in the centre of your button stand, but you can check that in a minute, and then I just tend to put a pin in where my buttonhole wants to start from that end there, so on there. There's quite a lot on here. No, that isn't centered in the middle, but I'm going to check that in a minute. I just want to get roughly the distance and get where they are. You could then once you've got the top one in, just or the top couple, then measure them down from there if you wanted to. I just tend to do it this way. I will have to measure down in a minute because I lengthened my pattern, so they will go out of, out of measurement. But all I'm doing is just pinning at the bottom end there of the buttonhole, okay, and then pinning up like that. That's the bottom edge of the buttonhole, like that. Realised I've lengthened it quite a bit. I can see I've got enough buttons now. Shouldn't be minding buttons. I lengthened mine by about 10 centimetres, which is where you can see here in the length and shorten line. So as I say, that will make my buttonholes go off, out of sync, as it were. So I will measure from then on down from this last one. The other thing is then just to check that they are in the centre. So it's a 2 centimetre button stand, so that's a centimetre in the middle, that one's a centimetre in the middle, that one's slightly off. It's okay now. That one's in the middle. That one's just slightly off. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to go and stitch those. So I start my buttonhole there and work backwards. Okay, so I'll start it there and work backwards on each of them, and then the collar one will go this way. Will go across. These go up and down, and that one will go across there. So I'm just going to put that, line that up. So I want that about a centimetre in. So I've got any pins on it. That one's going to want to go there, so you just want to make sure again you've got it roughly in the centre of your button stand, and then go that way. Okay, so that one's going to go that way, and those are all going to go up that way. Okay, so I'm going to go and just check I've got enough buttons before I stitch those with my buttonhole foot, and then I'll put some pictures in at the end of what the dress looks like. Okay, so I hope that's helped someone with their sewing, and yeah, the Bleuet dress is a lovely pattern.